Warning, this show contains adult language. Welcome to another edition of Up and In It. I'm your host, Adrian Babashoff, and if you're new here, welcome as well. And if you're wondering what the show is about, it's entirely dedicated to improving quality of life for both people and planet through liberation and independence, moving you from surviving to thriving and living life on your own terms. All right, a lot of you guys probably heard about aquaponics. If you haven't, it's actually growing fish or water creatures in symbiosis with growing plants. The fish, the water creatures, will actually poop and pee and cause this sort of discharge they have in their body, and the plants will pick that up and use it as nutrients. Now, if we just had just the fish by themselves, they would actually pollute the vessels that you're keeping them in, and there would be no oxygen for them to actually live. So in turn, the plants create oxygen to a certain extent and actually use up that poop and pee and clean it all up. And it's this circle, this closed loop circle that works in symbiosis. So I wanted to talk today about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think a lot of people get excited about aquaponics. It seems very, very popular, and it seems like a really good thing, and I think that it is, and I kind of think that it's not. And I'm going to give you the reasons at the end why I actually quit aquaponics. So let's get into it. So we have a few different types here. And to my knowledge so far, I haven't been keeping up with it, in a few years. But when I first started out, there was only really like three. There's the floating raft type. There's also the nutrient film, which is a pipe system that goes in. Well, let me explain each one in their entirety. Floating raft is basically, it's a tank of water, and you're going to want at least about a foot of water for the root capacities. And what you're going to do is you're going to create a raft that floats on top. Mainly this is done with styrofoam, and they'll drill holes, about 2-inch holes to 1.5 holes, to 4-inch to 6-inch, depending on what you're wanting to grow. And what you do is you have this raft basically just floating on top of water. You have your fish tank, and your fish tank is connected to these grow tanks. And what happens is that water will circulate from the fish through a pump. It'll suck up all the poop and the pee and all the nutrients and everything, and it'll transfer it over to the floating raft system, where it fills up these vessels. They can all be tied in unison, tied in like in series, kind of like solar panels, so that when one fills up with a pipe on the bottom, it'll actually gravity feed to the next one in series and fill that one up and keep it all nice and level. Now, most aquaponic systems, before I move forward, have to have a certain level to them. Some have to be exactly perfect. Some of them, such as the nutrient film, doesn't really have to. You can actually put a slant. In fact, I think the slant would actually help. But so what we have with the floating raft is that you can grow almost pretty much anything. I haven't seen I haven't seen people growing corn out of them. Now, is it the best practices on some species? No, not really. But each one has its pros and its cons. So basically, the construction, I guess you would say, is you start off with your fish tank. That's going to pump the water over to a tote. Is the way I built mine. These are IBC totes that you can buy, which they say are cheap, but I think through popularity they're gaining popularity, and they're actually getting a little more expensive. But around $100, you can say, give or take, depending on where you're at in the world, where you're at in the country. I know we got listeners from all over the place, but yeah, it was, for me, if it was $100, you'd have $100 for your fish tank for a big 370 or 275 gallon tank. I think they make them at 375 as well. And this gives you something that's roughly about 4 by 4 feet by about 4 feet tall. And you can grow yourself, some tilapia or use goldfish. A lot depends on, with all of these systems, on your climate. You cannot really grow tilapia if it gets really cold. They need some warm water, unless somebody's doing something that I'm not aware of. But yeah, you're going to have to figure out your spacing. The cool thing about doing the floating raft is that you have more water surface, so you can actually grow more fish condensed inside of your fish tank than you could with, a media-based or an NFT, because there's a lot more water involved. So yeah, basically the floating raft consists of that. Is just vessels of whatever you can find that you can keep level, that you have about at the minimum, I'd say, a foot of water. And when you plant your plants, you're just going to put them in these little cups. And there's these little plastic baskets. And basically, one of the ways that you can start off with the floating raft, which is really nice, is you can actually build yourself a small little tray that holds water that floods and drains. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later. And what you're going to use is a media of coconut coir and vermiculite. And you're going to stuff each one of these baskets, and then you're going to drop a seed in each one of the little cup baskets, and you're going to sprinkle just a little bit of vermiculite on the top. And what this is going to do is cover the plant and keep it from dehydrating and moisturing, the moisture evaporation. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to build yourself this long table tray, right? It could be just maybe about 4 inches high with a drain on the other end. And you're going to set this thing on a timer pump. And flood and drain means just exactly the way it sounds. You're going to set all of these cups, these baskets inside this container in this vessel. And what you're going to do is you can get yourself a piece of PVC pipe about like a 1 inch, I think is the best, so that it doesn't clog. And you're going to raise that up about maybe, let's say about a half an inch. And what you're going to do is you're going to get a threaded PVC 1 inch nipple piece, basically. And you're going to thread that into a drain, and that way when the whole table floods, right, it fills up. It's only going to fill up about a half an inch, and you're going to continue that water flowing for a half inch for however long you think you need and how many times per day. I guess there's a lot of details that goes into aquaponics, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys the quick kind of introduction to it. So as the water fills up, it can't drown the plants. It's going to go inside that 1 inch pipe over the top, and it's going to spill down and return back to your fish tank. Well, once it's done cycling and everything's nice and wet, we got to drain that water. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill ourselves a hole even with the bottom of the surface of the tray, the giant table that we have. And that's going to slowly seep all that water and drain everything out. So the top 1 inch part acts as a full drain to keep everything from flooding and overflowing. And then the small little hole down at the bottom where the threads are, that's going to allow that water to drain out. It needs to be smaller so that it doesn't drain all at once. It allows everything to fill up. This is completely automated. This is one consideration that I have actually to use my fish pond, which I'm not really using as an aquaponics system right now, but an idea I have to actually grow a lot of my own seedlings, because it's completely automated. I don't have to really do anything, and it's relatively cheap. You don't really need to use nutrients or anything for your soils, to get your seedlings started. The idea that I have, I'm going to release here for you guys, is to get these biodegradable seedling bags. They're these little cloth bags that biodegrade. I'm more into biodegradable, and we'll talk a lot more about that and why the cons of aquaponics and why I quit. But what you can do is fill up these biodegradable container sacks, and they're little tiny. You get them in all different sizes, 2 inch by 2 inch, and you pack each one of these. Obviously, a lot more work than actually a plastic grow basket or grow cup. It's easy. You can just scoop this thing, and we have a little bag. You got to hold it open, pack it in there and everything. But in the long run, there's more transportability, I think, and to your farm or to your garden. And to me, I look to sell seedlings. So that's where I can hand this cup over to somebody and be done with it. So yeah, you're going to fill those up, and you're just going to basically do just like I told you. You're going to let maybe you can get yourself like 8 goldfish inside of a 100-gallon pond, and you're just going to siphon that water every time you want to grow your seedlings every year and not even have to worry about it. So and when you're ready to grow, pick those plants up, you can stick them directly in the dirt or cut them out of the biodegradable bag, and there's no plastics really involved, and it's a beautiful thing. And seedlings, in my opinion, don't need so much nutrients as larger plants. So if you have just a few goldfish who are comfortable, not overcrowded, I think that's going to be just fine. That's one of the things I'm going to be working hopefully here in the next coming years. So yeah, that's the floating raft. Usually you're going to go with about a 2-inch thick piece of styrofoam. You need something for the plants to hold the weight. Usually about a 4 inch is probably, I'd say about a 2 inch is the best. A 4 inch is getting a little bigger for the thickness. That's the root system. The cups need to actually have contact with the water. So basically a 2-inch piece of styrofoam, and that's going to float on top. I did have some other ideas before where we can actually build some wood grating or some aluminum or stainless steel so that we don't have to use styrofoam, because in my opinion, styrofoam's toxic to the earth and toxic to make and everything, and it's kind of brittle as well. And what a lot of people do is they'll actually paint the top of the styrofoam with literally exterior house paint so that it doesn't degrade from the sun. I've got my issues with that, but we'll talk about that later. You need some sort of protective layer on the styrofoam for it to not degrade and start entering into your water and just crumbling. The other factor you have to factor in with the floating raft is that when you basically would lift the tray or the raft up. You don't want to do 8-footers, they'll probably snap in half. You want to cut it down to 2x4s, 2x2s. At the largest, I would say a 4x4 foot piece. And you're going to lift that up with all your baskets, set it on the table. So it's got really nice ease of use. So you just set it on the table, you don't have to bend over. And when you're gardening, if you level your system out to where it's just at waist height, you never really have to bend over and do anything, even at harvest, planting, anything. So that's a good plus that the floating raft has. And let's see here. The idea I had actually was to use silicone roof coatings on the styrofoam. Now, silicone is a lot stronger, in my opinion, than like acrylic paints. The thing that I liked about the silicone is that it's got solar reflective abilities. And actually, certain silicone coatings have NSF approval, which means it's safe for drinking water. So it encapsulates the styrofoam and also protects it from the sun, and actually protects it, I think, with more integrity if it's bouncing around or you set it on a table. Even though silicone is kind of soft, I mean, if you really hit it hard, it's probably going to snap, especially later on in its years. But it's got a white reflective ability. The aesthetics of it is really pretty and nice, and that was my idea. But the problem was getting it to stick. I think that you need to use like an epoxy primer or something, but I'm not sure how the chemicals of the epoxy would work with the styrofoam. But needless to say, I'm not into that type of thing anymore, so I kind of quit doing my innovations and experimentations on that sort of system. Okay, and before we go forward too, I've tried all of them. I've tried the NFT, I've tried the floating raft, I tried the medium. I had everything built all into one system, and just to see how everything worked. And I grew it for probably about 3 years. So that's where I'm coming from with the information that I have. If I can say more on the floating raft is this is actually quite the best, probably the cheapest way I would say to do large like farm scale. I would say probably even for the backyard gardener. I would say, in my opinion, it does take up some space, but it is pretty much the quickest, the cheapest, and the least amount of problems that could happen as far as clogging and things like that. So something to take in consideration if you're into the aquaponics systems here as we go through them. I think it's not quite as expensive as I said, and it's very productive. I mean, the numbers are like 8 times as much as you can grow in soil in like half the time. The plants really don't have to fight in really any aquaponics system. There's nutrients readily for them. The root system doesn't have to really work and push at anything, especially in a floating raft system or an NFT. There's just literally water underneath them, and there's just these angelic, bright, white root systems that develop. Very beautiful. But the plant just literally just goes for it so that it just springs up, has everything it needs. I mean, the other thing I could say about a floating raft system too is and I have proof of this from large scale farmers that I know at the time, was the thought that I had as like a human being. When you get freezing cold, right? You're just cold and you got to raise your temperature. What is the way to do that, right? If you're in the snow or something. If you guys notice from the old days, the remedy was to stick your feet in the side of a bucket of hot water, warm your feet up, and that will get the blood circulating, your internal temperatures up. Well, come to find out, this is also the same for aquaponics. So if you're growing things in, say, Hawaii or the desert or something like that, if you have a large enough body of water on a large scale, of course, it's gonna the thermal inertia of the water is gonna keep a certain temperature a lot cooler than what's going on around. So the cardiovascular system of your plants, say like lettuce and things like that, is actually going to stay cooler, and that way they're less likely to bolt. Now, I think this can also be done in the opposite, where you could heat the water, and that's actually going to cause I don't know if you guys are ever familiar with people building greenhouses. What they do is they get like these black barrels, black metal barrels or plastic barrels, blue barrels. They fill them up with water and they put them way in the back so that the sun heats up that water. Well, what happens at nighttime as the temperatures drop, your greenhouse temperatures will drop, and by early morning, you'll be the same temperature as outdoors, unless you have some sort of thermal inertia, some sort of heat element there. So you can use that to actually heat your aquaponics system. You can run, I actually ran a solar powered system where I built a box with a 1/2-inch PVC pipe, and I ran it like a snake, all the way, like zigzagging all the way through. I painted the interior black, I painted the PVC black, I glued everything together, and actually got my water to 80 to 90 degrees, I believe. That's in Southern California. Because for a lot of you don't know, a tip for growing tilapia is they got to reach like 80 degrees, I believe it was, in order for them to actually make their babies. And you got to keep that water warm. So in contrast to all the other aquaponics systems we're going to talk about today, the thermal inertia, the diversity that you have is way more with the floating raft, in my opinion, than any others. You can also run geothermal, which means we would dig down in the ground. I forget how many feet it was, maybe at least 8 feet. And you're going to run a series of pipe, just like we would for a solar water heater, right? And what you're going to do is dig all that ground out. You're going to bury these pipes. You can do large PEX pipe, and all the water that flows from the aquaponics system goes down into the ground and will regulate around 50 to 65 degrees, give or take. Almost no matter where you're at in the world. So you can use geothermal as well if you're in hot situations to cool your stuff for free, if you're so inclined and have the ability to do so. So yeah, floating raft, pretty cool. There's a lot of other things, but I don't have time to get into all the details. But let's move on to the flood and drain media-based systems. Now this was actually probably my least favorite. Flood and drain means that you get this bell siphon, and this is where it's this PVC pipe. It's kind of hard to explain, where you'd have a drain basically, and a pipe coming up. I don't even know if I can even explain it to you guys. Well, you make this little siphon that sits over an existing pipe drain. And what happens is this pipe drain will be a certain extent high, like say about 4 inches, right? And then you're going to cut a large piece of PVC pipe with these little inlets on the bottom, these little cuts, these little divots, and you're going to cover the top and make it airtight. And what happens is that water starts to suck in through this bell siphon. Very interesting and fascinating when you build them. It's a cool, very cool science experiment. Well, when the water rises to the inner pipe, it starts to drain and causes suction. It causes a vacuum. Well, the bell siphon is a cup basically on top of that pipe with some airspace. As that water's flowing and flowing and flowing, once you stop the flow of water, that thing vacuums. It starts to work as like a siphon when you're siphoning gas out of your gas tank. It causes a suction. It starts to suck all that water up. Like I said, very interesting. And it goes against gravity. As gravity's going down, it pushes and pushes and sucks. And this bell siphon gets all of the water completely out of the tank, the holding tank, and down to nothing. And then it'll burp, and then it'll just go and stop. That's why they call it a bell siphon. So these things, if they're moved around or anything, sometimes they get very tricky. You gotta, if you're making your own, you gotta really do some experimentation. Otherwise, you'll get a system where it could flood over the whole top. So that's why I don't like those type of things. If you don't know what you're doing, this could actually cause a lot of trouble. But so yeah, that's the flood and drain. So it floods up, and what you have in the media base is you have shale you can use, polished glass rock. I mean, anything that's not going to change the pH of the water. You can use gravel, but you need to be very careful with gravel. You need to do some testings. There's some stuff you could do where you put it in water and you put some vinegar in there, and if it fizzes up, that means that you have not very good gravel. It's going to be acidic, right, or alkaline. Different things can change. Now, one thing I don't like with people doing is putting clamshells, I think it was, oyster shells, to bring the pH down. Well, what happens is as these oyster shells keep disintegrating, if you leave them in there, they'll actually turn your water too alkaline. So there's different ways you're going to need to balance, and I don't know if we have time to get into balancing the pH, but it's a very big issue that you need to learn for the survival of your fish and your plants. Yeah, you're going to fill up this tank just like we did the the floating raft. But this is where you don't need a foot. You can actually get by with just 6, 8 inches, 6 inches, I think is the magic number. But I've even seen and witnessed people doing it with like 2 inches of gravel. I know that may surprise a lot of people. They're going to be like, what? Let's talk about that for a minute now. So, well, the last thing we have is Hydroton, which is these little clay balls, which are completely pH neutral. They're expensive. They're very soft to work with, though. You can imagine gravel, if you're sticking your hands in there to try to pick up some roots, it's very abrasive. Whereas these clay pebbles are perfectly round, and you can literally just stick your hand like marbles. Very comfortable for you, I think, and the plants. So, yeah, you have this rock filled with stone, with rock, with shale, with Hydroton, clay pebbles, whatever you can in there. And that's basically called a media-based aquaponics system. You can literally, the cool thing about media-based is I actually let plants go to seed, and they would just drop seeds all over the place. I mean, you can literally just sprinkle stuff right on top of the media, the rocks, the clay pebbles, whatever you have, and stuff will just start growing all on its own. Now, the problem with this form of the media base is that it gets quite expensive. There's a lot of weight to it, right? You're filling it up with that much water and plus the gravel and everything. Now the Hydroton is a lot less weight than say gravel. But the thing I did not like about it is you get anaerobic areas. So what happens when you're filtering the water from your fish tank into the stones actually act as a filtration system, and there's this mud, right? This crud inside there. And what happens is as your plants are growing, something can happen to your plant where it gets a little root rot or something. And what will happen is you'll get an anaerobic area, meaning an aerobic is good bacteria. Anaerobic means that it can't get any oxygen because of all the mud around it, and it starts to rot and really stink. And this can actually ruin part of your system, the pH and all that kind of things, in my opinion anyways. So you got to lift up that area, get rid of, say, like a tomato plant will take up the root space of like the size of a basketball. And it's very stinky, and a lot of things could happen. Whereas in the floating raft system, there's no debris really. The debris gets chopped up with the filtration systems. I'm sorry, not the filtration system. The pumps. The pumps have a little propeller to actually to use gravity to cause some sort of centrifugal force to move the water. And in large enough systems, really, the fish poop and byproducts really get chopped up. You never really need to siphon or clean anything out. Now, if you're using the media-based aquaponics with the stones and the gravel and stuff like that, you're going to want to make yourself a siphon, right? What did they call that thing? I can't remember. It's a filtration system, basically, where you can get like a water bottle. I'm sure it'll come to me here, and you'll send water in one area. And basically what I did with mine is I cut a plastic 5-gallon drinking water bottle, cut the top open. And what we did is we fed the water in from the fish tank and into a 1-inch pipe, and then we put a little elbow of a PVC pipe on the end so that it aims it towards the side of the filtration bucket, the filtration container. And what happens, it spins the water in a circle, and as the water keeps spinning, a lot of the debris falls to the bottom of this conical shaped drinking water bottle, right? So as it's spinning, it spins out, and then it actually drains a little bit lower than that back into the fish tank. I can't remember what they call this filtration system, but I guess you guys can understand what I'm saying here. At the bottom of this 5-gallon water container, what you're going to do is you're actually going to put a rubber grommet with a valve, and that's going to seal everything so it obviously doesn't drip down and cause you to lose water in your aquaponics system. So what I had was that valve, and you actually get a bucket. You turn just like when you're making kombucha or brewing, if anybody's ever done that kind of stuff to get some of the yeast and stuff out, you turn the bottom and it actually spits out all the fish waste, and then you can close it off to where the water gets fresh, and you can actually take this waste and use it on your garden, such as wicking beds and things like that, which we should do a show about now that I think about it. I actually had wicking beds working with my aquaponics system. Okay, so we are running out of time. This thing would be so nice if I could just keep going. Media beds. Yeah, there's so much stuff I want to tell you guys about. But you'll need to do this swirl filter. Thank you, brain. The swirl filter to eliminate a lot of that sludge that's going in there, because it could be a mess. I mean, you have to empty all the gravel out and everything, and yeah, it becomes a mess. Your next one is your NFT, your nutrient film technique. Now, these could be done vertical. These could be done horizontal. You're going to drill holes, the same thing as the floating raft. You're basically just going to drill holes enough to accommodate those baskets, those little grow cups that we were talking about, where you stick them in. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to run aquaponics water, and you can do hydroponics the same way through these pipe systems. And what it's going to do is keep the plant, that's the cup with all the media inside of it, it's going to keep it wet, and it's going to keep the root systems going. And you can run this thing for a while, and you can shut it off, run it for a while, and shut it off. And that's going to keep everything moist and keep the oxygen for the plants, and you can grow stuff really, I think, in a lot less space with the NFT systems. Where you could really do good is when you flip them vertical, and you actually heat weld. You can make a cut on the top on one end, and you can heat weld and bend it in. I'm sorry, you're going to want to bend it out so that it's this cup for. It's very hard to articulate here without actually putting drawings in. You'd have to bend one end in and one end out, and it makes these little cups where you can put media in and actually grow stuff vertically. And you have a series of water that goes through each one that drains back into a sump pump. It's basically a tank where all that water would land and fill up, and then that pump would suck the water back into where the fish are. Gets a little intricate, I know. I probably lost a few people there. But definitely things to take in consideration. So before I take up too much time, though, with all this, because we are running out here, is I want to talk about what can go wrong. Now, one of the biggest things that you can do that can go wrong with your whole system, in my opinion, and a lot of large growers agreed with me, professionals, is that the most important thing is oxygen. If you do not have oxygen, your fish will die. One of the biggest things you're going to want is a DO meter. That's a dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen means that where your fish tank is at, you're going to want to have a bubbler, right? You want to have oxygen flowing. Even though the plants are great, doing things, you still have to have that oxygen to keep them levels up. Dissolved oxygen means is as those bubbles keep flowing through the water, they actually start to dissolve into oxygen, right? Oxygen wants to float up and just disappear like a gas. Well, when you're shooting enough oxygen continually through the water, they both absorb together, they emulsify, and that's how you know you got enough oxygen. Well, you need a meter to know what these are. If your fish die, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you're on a large, well, not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of dollars you're going to lose out. And it could be simply something as something got unplugged, or there's a blackout, electricity went out. And that's kind of another thing that I would say with the aquaponics system is why I looked at it is it's grid tied. As far as is it sustainable is like one of my questions I have here on my notes. For other various reasons, if you were gone or even for a day, I don't think that your fish would die for a day, 2 days, depending on how much density, the stock density you have of fish. I think you'd be okay for a day or two, but you start getting a little further than that, they're going to use up all that oxygen. You can imagine it's like sticking, 100 people inside of a garage and just air seal the whole thing. Everybody just breathing. We're going to use up all that oxygen, and then we're going to have people, blacking out and possibly worse. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. If you have the wrong type of styrofoam, which I lost all my fish, all of my koi, my goldfish, my tilapia, my rare fish that I purchased. There's a chemical on the styrofoam for termites and things like that, which I didn't know. And I got these lesions on the side of my fish. Their ribs were basically bursting. Their skin was ripping apart. It was because of the toxins I believe, from the styrofoam. And I see people just grabbing stuff and just throwing things, aquaponic systems together. And I'm like, hold on, guys. And one of the things you guys want to take into consideration, if somebody made a YouTube video of this new system they're making and you never see it again, there's probably a reason. Everything flopped, right? So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. You're making a whole ecosystem here, guys, and we're mimicking nature. And to me, it's almost like Frankenstein. If you don't have enough oxygen in the water, and you don't use chemicals or something else to balance the pH, because the pH in a new aquaponic system is just going up and down. It's going all over the place. And that's the hardest part, is to get everything stabilized so that it stays between, you want a pH of about 6.5 to 7.2. That's optimal with everything, even ground soil and things like that. So what you want to do is you want to get your system, and you want to start playing with, maybe put a few plants and stuff in there and kind of watch the systems as they work. One of the problems we have too with our water system, especially in the city, is chlorine, and worse than chlorine is chloramine. Chlorine, we can let the system sit open for a few days, and we can set those bubblers for the fish and let it just kind of gas off. The bubbles help move the water, Chloramine, on the other hand, is used very widely now because it doesn't evaporate. It makes it a lot more useful for sanitation and stuff in water. But unfortunately, this could hurt your plants and your aquatic animals. The way to get rid of this is just figure in about 1,000 milligrams of a chewable vitamin C per 55 gallons of water. Dump that in there. I can't remember all the details, but what happens as the vitamin C breaks down, the acids in it, the ascorbic acid, will actually help you evaporate a lot of the chlorine, if not all of it. So there's a lot of things that you're going to have to do. There's so much to tell you guys, but I'm only limited to 30 minutes, and I've been going way over my time here. So let's talk about, is it really sustainable quickly? It's a use of plastic, use of styrofoam. This is the reasons why I have on my last one here is toxicity considerations. Now, I pissed off a large aquaponics community. People won't talk to me anymore because all I simply asked was, let's take a water sample of an aged system, especially with the floating raft, and let's have it analyzed to see what kind of toxins. Because what we have is the sun beating down with some people using containers that aren't food grade. This is crazy. These little black boxes that you buy at the hardware store, at Walmart or something, these little totes, vinyl swimming pools, polyvinyl chloride. Does anybody know what polyvinyl chloride is? Also, the large farmers, the floating raft systems are used with roof membranes, which are EPDM, which are pond liners. It was very expensive, but they're using the TPOs, the thermoplastic or the PVC roof liners. Why? Because they're very durable, hard to puncture. They can withstand a UV protection and things like that. But it says on the label, known in the state of California to cause cancer and birth defects. Of course, everything because of some proposition that was done. Jerry Brown, I can't remember all the details there, but they had to put this on because of lawsuits and stuff like that. But my opinion, anything that's made to resist the sun, there's some sort of chemicals in that stuff, even probably the silicone, that we're not being aware of. And you would say, well, it's probably just minimal amounts, and after time it would accumulate. Well, what happens when the sun beats anything on the planet? Stones, wood, people, anything, metal, it degrades things. Where does that stuff go in a closed loop system? So if you've got styrofoam, you've got acrylic paints, of course, you can figure on acrylic about 2 layers of sheets of paper per year, mils, are going to be ripped off. They're going to disintegrate off that layer. Where does that go? It goes into your fish, it goes into your plants, and that's what you're consuming. So the good thing is that, I don't know, people aren't dying off of it, There is it's cheap, it's kind of bad. The ugly, though, as I say, is as far as sustainability, having to go get fish food to feed your fish if you're not producing your own is ground up other fish that are harvested from the ocean and places like that. So there's a lot of questions about sustainability. These clay pebbles, how they're made, obviously styrofoam. I don't even think we need to touch on that one, right? So the toxicity levels is one thing that got me. Leaving something in plastic. Get yourself a plastic water bottle, which is supposed to be 100% safe. Leave it in the sun or even out of direct sunlight. Just leave it in your car on a hot day. Smell it, drink it, and taste it, and see what you think. Now we have this huge vessel of water just sitting there baking in the sun for years, if not decades. What's going to happen? What's the off-gassing going to happen with systems like that? The other thing beyond all that stuff there, which stopped me from doing it, and don't get me wrong, guys, I loved it. I got obsessed with aquaponics. I still incorporate it into my life. I still want to grow seedlings and stuff like that. I've got a little system I don't have time to talk to you guys about, some experimentation I did where I don't even separate the fish from the plants. The fish actually eat the roots, I eat the top, and we have a symbiotic relationship there. And it's not all species, but yeah, that's probably another day for a podcast. But the thing is, how many things can go wrong? The electric going off, a hole starting where the whole thing drains out. You're not there, even for, let's just say, an hour, 2 hours. What if a significant hole, a mouse ate a hole in the bottom of your container, or you had one little crack that happened? So many things can go wrong. And if you're depending on this for resilience, for sustainability, for survival, or for your business, a lot of things can go wrong really, really fast. That's why I've invented the biodegradable container gardening systems, where you don't have to be a sort of chemist to sit here and read the levels every single day, which you have to in an aquaponic system. You need to have your nitrates, your nitrites, all your pH, all of these things tested, every ammonia levels every single day, at least every other day, to make sure that nothing's going wonky. And then you'll have to put additives and stuff in there to accommodate these for the fluctuations. But so much is going in. When my systems it's a basket made of burlap, it's biodegradable. There's hardly any plastic involved except for the automatic drip irrigation. And those drip irrigation can actually be hidden underneath, so it's not exposed to the sun ever, just the small tip. And to me, there's no moving parts whatsoever. My worm castings and everything goes in the basket. I don't check pH systems. It doesn't matter if the electricity's shut off because my automatic water timer works on 2 AA batteries. So if we had a blackout for a month, my stuff would keep going. And as I said, it's not complicated at all. It's very simple and it's movable. It goes with me. And in my book, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than aquaponics, hydroponics, and the other things that I've learned throughout my days of becoming sustainable and living a resilient life. But guys, I'm way out of time over here. Please like and subscribe. That's why I want to get this show going, so I can just go as long as I want. I would love to do an hour and a half. I'm sure those of you who started following, I got some tips and tricks I would love to share with you guys. I just don't got the time. But I would love if this show could progress to something to where I could actually at least break even, because I have to pay to do this show. That's why I've limited myself in a budget, which we like to talk about on the show, to only 30, and I'm going on 36 minutes here. So, okay, guys, that's the end of the show, and I just want to thank each and every one of you guys for being here today and taking the time to listen. And if I brought you guys any value of any type, please, and only if I gave you guys some value, like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down. If you gave me a thumbs down, tell me why. I would love to hear your opinion on the subject matter. But it really helps the algorithms and for the show to get out. And if I've given you something in return, please feel free to share this show, comment. All of those things help us to develop and keep this show up and running. So guys, as I always say, go out there and have yourself a near life experience. Don't lose your muchness. Carry on the fire. Human up. Live it, love it, own it, and bone it, my friends.